Dear colleagues, clients, and friends, welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Robertson Stephens inaugural Fireside Chat. My name is Raj Bhattacharya, and I'm the CEO of Robertson Stephens. It is truly a privilege to have as our first guest, Tom Donohue, who has had an illustrious career capped off with his recent retirement after a 24-year stint as the CEO and president of the United States Chamber of Commerce. Although I may add that Tom seems to be largely retired in name only and continues to be very active in all of his pursuits. Tom will be interviewed by my colleague and our Chief Economist, Jeanette Garretty, who should be no stranger to anyone who is a regular viewer of our webinars. Tom and Jeanette will be discussing the state of the American economy, the outlook for businesses, and I'm guessing a number of other topics upon which they will stumble. I will be collecting questions that you may submit using the Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your Zoom screens. And I will come back in a bit and pose these questions to Tom and Jeanette. So if you have questions that you would like to ask, please do not hesitate to post them. Our standard disclaimer is obviously that the material we will discuss here today is intended for general information purposes only and should not be construed as investment, tax, or legal advice. The contents of this webinar may not be quoted, recorded, copied, reproduced, or redistributed in any form without the express written consent of Robertson Stephens. With that, let me turn it over to you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Raj, and good afternoon, everyone. Tom, it's a tremendous pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you as we head into what may be a decade-long economic expansion. Having firmly established the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as a lobbying and political powerhouse with significant influence across the world, you have played a unique and extremely influential role in shaping, framing the future of the American business community and the economy in general. It is with that in mind, I'd like to take you into a discussion of the future as you currently see it. We seem to have moved very rapidly from a focus on the challenges of surviving pandemic closures to questions about managing the resurgence in demand. Every day seems to bring new headlines about supply chain problems and unfilled job openings. The Federal Reserve says that this is transitory. Is it? Or is something longer term at work here?
Well, first of all, let me say to all of your colleagues, thank you very much for inviting me to be with you today. And thank you for the opportunity to chat with you and others about what we are all looking forward to with some concern, at least. To the issue that you raised, first of all, let me say that I have a lot of respect for the Federal Reserve and for a good number of the members that I know fairly well as we work with them on a regular basis. Everybody would say, from the business community in particular, what a wonderful job they've done in over 15 months to stabilize the economy, keep interest rates low, and take the steps that seem to have kept us moving. 37% of the people in this country never took off, went home, did any of that. They were on the street, were running the television stations, they ran the power generators, they did all that stuff. And that gave the Federal Reserve a sort of an anchor to measure. And then they started to look at how many people are actually working and who was really in trouble. And they took very, very clear steps. Some people said, wow, but a lot of money moved. And with that, we avoided what we were all trying to avoid, and that was a real depression. We've only seen those once or twice in our country, but they're very hard to fix. So on the first thing you said, I'm betting on the Federal Reserve up till this time. Now we've listened in the last few days and you're starting to see the smoke coming out of the Vatican that says, we may be going to do something else. And that means they're going to start, letting up on the controls. And that means we're probably going to end up with a modest amount of inflation. That means that some of the real confidence that kept the small investors and the risk takers to really be driving the stock market might tone down a little. So now we're sort of back to the Kentucky Derby. Here is what the Fed is to do in one direction. Here's what the economy wants to do in the other direction. And I think that will balance out. There'll be so much drive on the economic side to offset anything the Fed begins to do as they look at the accumulated numbers of all their good work. And I think at least we're going to move forward at the rate we're not exactly sure. Let me make just two other comments. All of this, all of what we hope is dependent on having enough people to do the right jobs in our economy. I have some people working on trying to get the demographics right and the economic numbers in the government versus what's in the private sector and so on. And it's a little scary. We don't know, but we've done very well over a long period of time by seeing which direction the wind's going and going in that direction. And I think it is clear that this economy will not improve to the extent that we hope it will improve if we can't get the workers. And perhaps we can talk about that later. The second thing is you're going to have to worry about the pandemic. It is not finished. It's doing very well in the United States. I mean, in round numbers, 60% of the people have had some vaccination, but we got a long way to go. But the real issue, this is not a domestic pandemic. This is a global pandemic. And what we have worried about for a long time are the variants. And that is the more vigorous the pandemic runs and multiplies, the more likely you're to get variants. And we were just a little while ago, before we went on air, talking about the problems in India, which shortly, in my opinion, will be the problems in Africa. And that suggests that we're all the established, the profitable countries are going to have to get into this to keep the pandemic going. Final issue, which I think is very, very critical for us to keep an eye on, and I'm going to speak, Jeanette, I'm going to speak very carefully. I know Joe Biden fairly well. We have a man in the White House that is proud of his country, who's been at this for a long time, and he wants to do whatever he can to create jobs and to get the government involved, which they should be involved. But I think the president is harking back a little too far to get his examples of how we have to move forward. And we've already are spending trillions and trillions of dollars on the pandemic, on keeping people stable during it, and on going forward. And the president is proposing, and the Congress is considering, from different perspectives, how much we're going to spend going forward and for what purpose, and what will that do to help or hinder our ability to get the workers we need to make this economy go.
Fascinating observations, as always. I think you've touched on certainly a couple of things, and I know that our audience is very interested in. I'll start with the first one, perhaps the most obvious one. The money that's been spent and the increase in both the national debt and the widening of the federal budget deficit. How do we deal with this? There's one body of thought that says, don't worry. I'm an economist. I always worry. I don't know where you fall on this, but what is the likely way that we're going to have to deal with the spending that we're doing right now?
Well, if you went to groups of both sides of this argument, and you went to the don't worry people, what they would say, well, this is fine. We're going to have such massive economic growth that we're going to stabilize our situation. We're going to put more people to work than we've ever had. We're going to pay them more than we ever did. We're going to go to the lower income spectrums of our society, and we're going to give them a lot of support and believe that that's going to create a lot of economic growth. Some of what I said is true. Now you're going to go to the other side, people that traditionally are in charge of worrying because they're smart. They're economists, they're people that run big companies, they're people that invest money, and they're thinking about how far can you bend the tree over before it breaks? And they're right, but they're both right. And so what we really hope for is some moderation on both sides. I don't believe that the president is going to get to spend all the money he wants to. And by the way, a lot of the money since the beginning of the pandemic has not gone away. We've given it, we've passed it out, or it's still in the federal coffers and has not been yet moved off the federal balance sheet, if there is one. And also that a lot of the people that got that money, you and your company know these numbers, but the savings on people on the lower end of the economic spectrum have gone up significantly. People in the market also made money while they were at home. So it's not as bad as it looks, and it's not as good as we hope. And we're going to have to work on it, which is, by the way, the fundamental issue of economics. It's a fundamental issue of business. It's the fundamental issue of what makes this country great. You gotta work at it.
You have worked at the chamber through a number of administrations. You have, in some respects, seen it all. Our chief investment officer, Stuart Katz, worked for a while for your chief economist, George Bush, under George Bush Sr. In that context, what's two things, I guess. I know you've got the ability, you have had, and you do have the ability to pick up the phone and call just about anybody in Washington, D.C., and they will take that call. What would you advise, what are you advising should be done? What can government do for this economy at this point?
Well, kind of you to say that I can pick up the phone and call anybody. That may be true, but we have no idea who's going to answer. And remember that most, over the time that I've been here, many of these positions that are so critical to what the government does to help or hinder continually have new faces in it. By the way, I'm not opposed to that. I think it's a strength of our country is that as administrations change, people change, and you hope there are folks that are prepared and that are schooled in these issues, and no matter their philosophy, they at least understand what's going on. What do I think going forward? I'm going to tell you what I think, but then I've got a caveat. And you know, I'm going to tell you the caveat first. Whatever I'm saying really depends on two or three fundamental issues. do we get control of this pandemic before it causes extraordinary economic disruption? Remember, we only have 300 million plus people. We are a part of a global economy. And without a message to the people that don't want to trade, if we don't trade, if we don't invest around the world, if we don't do that, our economy shrinks like So the big thing is what happens in the economy, and what happens in the pandemic is going to have a lot to do with what happens in the global economy. And by the way, you'll find I'm redundant in talking about a few things I really believe. The second thing that is critical, are we going to get the people we need to run this show? And the president's talking, in some places it's very important. I don't agree with them totally, but we've got to bring more manufacturing back on shore. Haven't got anybody to work there. We're going to have to bring in people that can do that. Because if we don't do that, people say, I don't want to do any immigration. We don't want to do that. Well, that's fine. Then the companies in this country, the investors in this country only have one other choice. Take their business, take it overseas so that they can do what we need to do to support the country's companies back here. Make your investments overseas so that you can drive down the problems in the supply chain, create the stuff we need and bring it back here. And if you take those and a few other issues that fit into a category called politics, now you can take a look at where you're going. We talked about what we thought about going on in the Fed. I think if you take those two philosophies, oh, it's going to be great because we're going to be so big, and oh my goodness, it's that we can't believe it because the numbers can't go that high. We can prosper and move ahead so long as we do the things I mentioned and just put one more. But let's put an umbrella over it. We don't want to talk about it a lot. As long as we don't get into some major global military and economic battles with the wrong people. If those things go south while you're trying to get out of this hole, it'll look like people in a hole digging the hole deeper. If we can moderate and hold those things in check while we take all this spun up energy, tons of investment capital and a willingness to go get the people we need, we'll be fine as we can be if we work at it.
You've just managed to mention two of the hottest buttons, or push two of the hottest buttons in Washington on the political scene probably today, which is immigration and globalization. But I'm gonna turn that into a comment about China, right? These are two huge issues with a lot of differences of opinion and a lot of uncertainty as to how they're going to be resolved, right? Under your leadership, the chamber emerged as a major political force, and you always worked to protect the business community's right to speak and participate in the political affairs of the nation. So what, for example, on these two issues, what is the proper voice for American business on these two issues, especially, recognizing that we operate in an environment today of extreme partisanship and polarization?
Well, it's a little different than it's been in other times, but a little review of history will tell you we've been doing this dance for a long, long time. And the sign I put over it, the best way to protect our independence as individuals and as companies and as a country is to have that debate on a regular basis. If everybody agreed on something, we're going to be in trouble if that was an all the time deal. You can only do that in a dictatorship, and then the people that don't speak up don't agree anyway. I really believe that that we can prosper in these difficult times. But if you want to look at the issues of global trade, for example, and the questions of China, China is another one of those countries, 1,350,000,000 people. You put China and India together, you got a lot of people. And China, for the longest period of time, and by the way, the people in the chamber and when I was there, we had extensive relationships with China. President Xi, has a different view and is acting on that view, and he has support. And there are a lot of China issues that people don't think about. I'm sure you do, Raj and his team and you. The first thing about China, you know, we are the leading global currency here in the United States. But we ought to look in the rearview mirror, because China is all over the world trying to buy love and appreciation, which, by the way, is not working as well as they'd like. China also has a problem similar to ours. Their demographics are horrible. Mm-hmm. Longest period of time, they had the one-child policy. And now they've sort of changed it, but it's not changing very much. On the other hand, you must always remember what has happened in all of history about military unfortunate engagements. In many, many times, that's all about what are people looking for? They're looking for energy, they're looking for land, and very often they're looking for people. So the way we might do this might be different than they might do this. And so I think it's very, very important for us, first of all, on the whole question of playing in the international arena, to put down on our note, if we're not there, you just better be quiet. If you want to have an effect on what happens, what China does, what others do, what kind of a relationship that we're going to have with them, which can be very positive, then we need to be there. Now that brings you to immigration. I mean, I told you when we were talking the other day that we're doing a big project on civics. The chamber is. I'm still helping them on that. The whole idea is we stop teaching civics. And I got a great idea for all the smart people that are watching this show right now. Tomorrow, go online, get a copy of the test that you have to take to be a citizen of the United States. Get some of your family together over the weekend, and some of the kids, if they're still freeloading, and sit down around, you know, a glass of wine or a cup of tea, and go through that thing and see how much our children know, we know, and you know. We need to teach people how this system works. We need to go back in our schools to teaching civics and history, because if you don't pay attention to your history, you'll relive your mistakes, not necessarily your successes. So why go back to one last thing on immigration? I am fundamentally opposed to opening up the doors and windows and saying, y'all come in, because China would send 300 million people over here in a minute. They'd probably do it over a couple of years, but you'd end up with it. Bad idea. What we need is to look on our list, what do we need? On one end of the deal, we need unbelievable number of welders. But we have to take people we have and train them to do that as well. We need more nurses. We need doctors, because it takes a while to train the new ones. We need unbelievable number of technology people. We need folks that know how to manufacture, and we need people that know how to farm and plant and do all of this stuff. Where we don't have them, if we get them, what are you going to have? You're going to have three things. You're going to have the human talent that you need to run the economy. Second of all, you're going to have people that pay taxes, support their communities. The people that come here really want to work. And third, you're going to find out that we have what we fundamentally need, people to support this country.
The only thing in that listing that I'm surprised you didn't mention that we need are truckers, right? So I just today increased my estimate for world economic growth. That's largely a function of the growth in the United States and other parts of the world. We want to tap into that. We need to get goods from here to there. Truckers are a big part of that. Little known fact for the audience here, Tom has a historical association with the American Trucking Association. That's where he and I first met when he was addressing them, and he had put some time in. And I know you know that story. I think it's a little shocking to people. We know that there was a shortage of truckers actually going into the pandemic. It's only gotten worse, right, Tom?
Well, yes. Just for a little quick primer here, before the pandemic, on any night, overnight, there'd be close to 3 million trucks on the road. Some little ones picking things up and taking them to bigger trucks, but trucks running all over the country. And the railroads are stuck full of stuff. The truckers, if you look at their demographics, they're terrible. They have a lot of people that are in their late 50s. I read a thing yesterday that the tank trucks, they carry gasoline, they carry milk, they carry food, they're going to have to shut down in the near future about a third of their tank trucks because they can't find tank truck drivers. Now, they can find a lot of people you can train to be a tank truck driver, but as the numbers look, you're exactly right. We're going to have to get some immigrants for that. One other point about all those truck drivers, I want you to see what happens in this country. So let's say we are successful in doing a rather significant infrastructure program, and we got good weather for the next 6-7 months. The builders, the infrastructure folks that build concrete facilities, roads, bridges, and all that stuff, they'll pay more than a truck driver gets. So the truck drivers, some truck drivers will come off the truck for the warm weather, and when it gets cold and ugly and all that, they'll go back in their warm truck. And I'm telling you, this is like when we were kids and the teacher took a shoebox and threw some blocks in it when he was trying to teach geometry, to say, no matter how you moved it around, you still have the same number of people or the same number of blocks in the same number of space. And it is fundamental. We don't have enough, and it will get worse depending on how significant and how quickly they can move on an infrastructure bill.
You know, on that front, and we keep coming back to demographics, and as you and I discussed, this is a big long-term issue for the United States that has somewhat got lost, although the headlines last month about the very slow growth of the population in 2020, 0.4%. It did get a lot of attention. My focus has always been on labor force growth. And the thing so many of us look at these days are labor force participation rates, which have fallen in some cases really notably, like with women in the workforce. Do you have any thoughts on what the solution for that is? I know, today we've got a headline that says 22 states have said they're going to curtail federal unemployment benefits to try and get people to come back into the workforce. The governor of Oklahoma has a very interesting plan. He says, the first 20,000 of you that come off the unemployment rolls, I'll give a $1,200 bonus. But these are Band-Aids. Is there a longer term solution to getting more people into the labor force to solve that labor force growth issue?
There are some very workable solutions, but just keep in mind that little box with the people inside it. First of all, I just want to make a point. Years ago, when we first started talking about women wanting to join the workforce, and all the accommodations that it appeared we were making to do that, the little secret nobody wanted to go out and tell everybody is we desperately need those women to join the workforce, or our problem is going to continue to get worse and worse in a big hurry. So lots of women join the workforce, and many of them in very important jobs and careers, and many of them in other work. If we go the other way on this, in nurses, for example, who are just worked out, and in people in other important jobs, childcare and so on, you can put all the money you want in the system. But if you don't have the human talent to do what the system demands, you're in real trouble. So you're going to have a combination of things. You're going to have to improve your education broadly, but right now in the community colleges, to teach people to do what we need, there are some folks still ready to be trained and educated. You know what the job in the workforce kind of thing that we need most? Welders. Send Junior to be a welder, and 2 years after when he comes out of school, you're going to be walking around and Junior's going to be making $100,000 as a welder. So those people can be trained. When you look on the other side at the unemployment numbers, you've got to recognize the extraordinary number of people that are not fit to work. We've got a huge drug problem in this country. That takes people off the wall. You've got serious shortages of people in a medical system that is being stretched, and we got to get those people, and we're going to have to borrow some of them. Right now, visiting nurses are helping us. If you sit down with an open-minded Congress, do everything you can here in a sensible way to do two things: grab every available worker, train them and get them to go to work, and rethink our education system so that just the scary number is how many people in this country have real problems because they can't read. By the time people get to 6th or 7th grade in the schools across this country, at least 50% of them cannot read well enough to learn going forward. Now, there are a lot of ways you can help that. There's re-education, but the bottom line, we've got to do that kind of education. We have to do skills training, and we've got to put people in the universities to study the things we need to do two things: to fill the jobs we need to fill, and to understand and support the fundamentals of why this country is so important, so protective of our freedoms and our right to be stupid and not very helpful and still be legally behaving in this country. We've got to keep those protections while we convince people that this country can only prosper, your children can only prosper if you get back to work.
I'm going to commit to, in our follow-up here, I'm going to take words probably out of Raj's mouth, but we're going to get that link to that civics test out to everybody. We won't ask for scores, but we'll take volunteers who will tell us how they do.
Well,
Raj, I suspect you have some questions you want to ask.
I do. We have some questions from the audience, and so let me just ask those. I will encourage anybody who still has questions to please submit them through the Q&A functionality on your Zoom screens. Tom, the first question is related to two topics you've already covered, but taking them together in a different directions. The topics are obviously immigration and China, but related to both of them is the reversal in the globalization trend we've seen literally since the Second World War, which has been such a big driver of both prosperity and therefore profitability of American companies. Whether that's immigration of people to the flow of capital across borders to really one of the big drivers, which you haven't touched on, is supply chains. I mean, your average product today is made from components in a dozen plus countries. The pandemic, and frankly, even before the pandemic, the trade tensions, particularly between the US and China, have resulted in this globalization trend that lasted 60, 70 years to reverse. Are you worried about that as vis-a-vis both prosperity of people and effectively the profitability of companies, which would obviously drive markets?
Absolutely. A lot of my background is in supply chain. I spent 22 years on Union Pacific, the largest railroad in the country's board. I ran the Trucking Association. I was Assistant Postmaster General at one point. And the bottom line is we absolutely have to get this supply chain put back together. Most people think, supply chains are trucks, trains, boats, all this, and we take things and we put it in it after we make it and we send it somewhere. Well, the first part is you got to do all kinds of things to make things. And you made a very critical point. Much of what we produce in this world gets produced, in 6 or 7 places. If you're making cars, but within the NAFTA group, you're moving it across borders 7 times before it's a finished product. You have extraordinary issues that supply chain also include people, human capital. We have to get people where we need them in the right. I mean, just go sit in the senior leadership of an American company trying to figure out where to put their talent, how to staff this business, how to fix that line, how to find new sources in a competitive way for the raw materials we need. And I'll explain it to you in one sentence. When I was coming up and, getting into business and all that, the supply chain or the transportation guy had a desk down next to the dock. Today, it's right down the hall or maybe 2 doors away from the CEO. If you can't run your supply chain, you can't make your numbers, you can't get the stuff you need to make your product, you can't get the talent you need. And by the way, part of the supply chain are the people you recruit from college or that you recruit to work on your various different efforts in manufacturing, in research, everything you're doing. It's all about supply chain. Tell your children to get to be a supply chain expert. They're going to make more money than anybody in the company.
The future is in logistics, right? We're recrafting, not plastics, but logistics. I'll add something there, Raj, that probably some failure to appreciate that some of what has occurred with globalization was in fact to solve a supply chain problem, meaning you can, the bringing everything back on shore doesn't necessarily get you to where you want to go as a reaction to the pandemic if you become dependent, therefore, on 1 or 2 factories, for example. And so it's more an issue of building in flexibility and redundancy that we may not have had. So I call it reglobalization, not deglobalization.
if you bring a lot of this back on shore, you'll eventually, very quickly actually, shrink the economy, and you will shrink your innovation system, and you will become less a significant influence in the world.
That's interesting.
Very interesting. Again, touching on another topic you briefly mentioned earlier, which is you both actually talked about the deficit and the associated debt that's coming on board, and that's not just at the federal level, but also at the state levels. We know taxes, as a general rule, are going up, but do you foresee other forms of taxation that we have not seen in a very long time, such as wealth taxes, consumption taxes, or certainly in this country have not seen in a very long time, as the debt levels go up in the federal level and at the states?
Well, taxation has always been, all the way back to the time of Christ. You know, they were always criticizing the tax collectors. And you need taxes to run your country and to support your businesses. I absolutely, Raj, think that you've hit it right on the nut here. If we're going to tax wealth, as some of the progressives are saying, if we're going to decide that we should quantitatively cut off some amount of the income or wealth that people are bringing in and immediately transfer it to others, if we're going to look at taxes that become absolutely usurious, you know, a lot of things going to happen. And your company knows that better than anybody else. Thank you for asking the question. You absolutely don't know the answers. And that is, if you take away the incentive to work, people that have resources will stop working. If you try and tax people's capital or drive up taxes in states to the point they're ridiculous, they'll move. They'll be gone. I mean, look at what's happened in California, New York. I mean, hasta la vista. We're going somewhere, and you can do that with your wealth and your money. And I really believe that we ought to take advantage, encourage people to be very successful, pay a fair amount of taxes. I mean, the administration has a real gig going. I mean, they only answer half of the question, but they say, well, look at all these companies that don't pay any taxes at all. Well, why are they not paying taxes? Because the government put in incentive inducements to manufacture here, to hire these people, to invest in these projects, to put your money here. They forget all that when it comes down to saying you're not paying enough taxes. My view is we're going to have a little give here. Let me answer the question you maybe didn't ask. Biden and his team, under a lot of pressure from the left, have a plan that basically could take away a huge hunk of Americans' wealth and give it to the government. Ain't gonna happen. Some increases in taxes are inevitable. We always go up and down. And then there's the secret taxes. I mean, I bet you a lot of people don't know, people with wealth, that, we used to pay a Medicare tax up to 100,000 or 120,000. You paid 2.9% tax. Today, we pay it up to every nickel you make. If somebody down the hall makes $10 million, he's paying 2.9% on $10 million that nobody talks about. And now we have people saying, that's what we should do with our Social Security payments. Really? 7.5% on everything you do? Do people look at how much I pay in taxes and then say how much, and I pay, good amount, and how much I pay in the states, and how many of these secret taxes do I pay, and how much of my real estate taxes? The bottom line is, if you take away the wealthy who provide massive amounts of our philanthropy and massive amounts of our investment in markets and in companies and in countries, communities, you're going to wake up one day and say, who did we used to be? That's not who we are anymore.
You know, I'm a big fan of saying that, you know, one who does not study history is destined to repeat it. What history tells us here, going back to the 80s, which was a tiny budget deficit at that time under Ronald Reagan relative to what we're looking at right now, but it looked huge at the time. And there was an existing commitment that had been made by various individuals that said, no, you know, read my lips, no new taxes. Right? We all remember that. Some of us remember that. But the reality is, if we say that the budget deficit has to come down and inroads in the national debt need to happen, there are tools, and there's 3 of them, and you have to use essentially all of them. One is some tax increases, but not enough to cut off economic growth, because at the end of the day, it's economic growth that generates those tax revenues. And the third thing, which nobody's really talking about, is realizing that at some point, we may need to cut back on spending. So that's the 3-legged stool. How we do that in an era of Medicare and Social Security entitlement spending is a very, very difficult proposition. The economic growth that we're looking at right now, right, Tom, is terribly important, because the bigger this economy becomes, the lower the percentage of this economy that is represented by the debt. And that's how we bring it into some sort of reasonable proportion that we can deal with.
You know, if you just take a quick look at what happened back in Ronald Reagan's time, and then how big the economy was, and then move forward to where we are now, giving some adjustment to the pandemic, we're making progress on grow the economy. Yeah. We're not making a lot of progress on cut the spending. We're making progress on getting more and more a belief that government should support too many things in this economy, because the more government spends to do it, the more it puts into the fundamentals of how an economy runs, the more it loses its innovation, and it loses its ability to work its way out of the challenges we get into. Let me say, with great respect to the government scientists and all that, and with great thanks to our fellow citizens through the federal government who put a lot of money into this pandemic, we would still be trying to get vaccines out of a bureaucratic system with very careful, caring, and thoughtful people working there. We put this together with groups of companies that gathered together, got some federal funding, got a lot of funding from the Gates and other people around the world, and went out and did that thing in record time. That's how we protected this nation. That's how we've gotten over extraordinary tragedies in our country, and that's how we'll get out of this deal. We're not going to want to listen too hard to the people that are on the far end, or the far left, or the far right. What I worry about is that those people keep going around the circle and meet someday and form a party, and then we're in real trouble.
Thank you, Tom. That was very interesting. So moving gears completely, both of you actually talked about the labor force. Very specific question around the labor force deficit for lower wage workers. The question has asked about hospitality industry, but this is something we've seen in a number of industries, obviously. What do you think about the decisions to cut unemployment benefits, which I think, Jeanette, you talked about earlier, as a solution rather than encouraging wage increases or benefits? What are the trade-offs of one versus the others?
You know, I went to a dinner party the other night, and it was a wonderful evening, very nice. And I just knew some of those people there. I knew this was coming, was going to be the subject. Oh, Tom, why is the chamber supporting reducing that $300? How can you do that? I said, let's just make an inventory of what accompanies that $300. What the chamber's talking about is taking that $300 away so people see that's beginning to happen. But, you know, as I recall, they have regular and accelerated unemployment payments that are $600 a week or whatever they are. And they just got a check for $1,400. And out in California, they just got a check for $6,000. And oh, by the way, they get the earned income tax credit. Instead of paying any taxes, the country's paying them back from the tax circumstance. And they have now the Obamacare changes on healthcare give them with very little cost, if any, you know, better healthcare deals. We've been telling, we're not going to let them throw people out of their houses. We have worked that very hard. We now have a major other entitlement you'll never be able to get rid of once it's in on child care. You know, if you, if for the majority of the people, if they need child care, then the government's going to be sending the money every month. Listen, $300 is nothing more than a small addition to all of that money. And what we're trying to say, this deal can't keep up if you don't go back to work. I think my message, you can make a real good deal now. Go out, get a good job. They're paying more money than they used to be before we had the pandemic. Enjoy that. And you're going to end up keeping a whole bunch of these benefits and never going to figure out a way to take away.
It's very interesting. There's a report that came out today from San Francisco Fed, two economists at San Francisco Fed, who I think supported this, Tom, said at the margin right now, the federal benefits probably do have some influence. They don't give it a ton of weight, but they do say it has some influence in probably critical sectors as to who comes back into the workforce and when. I think on the other hand, though, when you also look at what's recent, Bank of America announced that it was going to raise its minimum wage. This would apply to a lot of tellers to $25 an hour. Walmart has increased its minimum wage rate. I think some of that reflects an understanding on the part of the business community that there are other reasons that people aren't back in the workforce. So the most notable one that's influenced by this are women who have had to stay home because of childcare and childcare costs, which may not be fully addressed by the government programs. So at any way you look at it, again, supply and demand, I think, is a beautiful thing, right? If the supply is constrained and the demand is going up, then the answer is supposed to be that the price goes up. If the supply of labor is constrained and the demand goes up, the price is going to go up. I think we are going to see wage increases. The Federal Reserve has actually set that out as a goal, which leads us into some debate as to whether we're going to see wage inflation and what that might mean for company earnings. It seems to me, It seems to me right now that companies that need workers are going to get those workers paying more and setting aside some badly needed investment spending in order to accommodate that. Do you see the same thing, Tom?
Well, if people get more money, they'll be willing to spend more money. And therefore, the fact that the wages are going up, you're going to see prices going up. You know, I was talking to a group of younger people a week or two ago, and one of them asked me, why are that house prices going up so quickly? We were just looking, as a young couple, We were just looking, and the next thing we turned around and, you know, we had a big increase. I said, it's supply and demand. Supply is way, way down. Therefore, the demand is gonna, you know, drive prices up. Now, there are a lot of other things that need in there, and it's location, and where are the taxes, and you know, look what they did in New York City. You know what New York City taxes are like. You don't pay 2 taxes, you pay 3 taxes. Pay federal taxes, pay state taxes, pay city taxes. And they just upped the whole deal by it. And the governor's screaming because people are moving out of the state. People are mobile. Companies are mobile. There are some things you can't do by moving out of the state. I mean, if you're running a church in the state, and if you leave, you know, that's an empty church. But there are unbelievable mobility issues which people will take, clearly are taking, that adds to the problem of worker availability. And let me add one thing to that. We're working on a project. If you look at the demographic numbers, they drive you nuts, because some of them, you know, have been the same numbers for years. We really need to get our demographics straight. But if you put it in all the states, you know, we're doing this thing 12, you know, every state, how many people live there? How many jobs are people want to fill? How many people, you know, how many of this do you have? How many of that you have? And all of a sudden you got a really interesting picture. Now, I have got a great job for you, really important. We can pay you a ton of money, and it's in North Dakota, and it's in the winter. Keep going. And the issue is, when you look at all this demographic placement of workers, they're in a lot of the right places, but in a lot of the places that are really critical, not only do we not have enough, but the ones that we've got, they're not too hot to come here. Mobility. But we're going to have incentives to get people where we need them. It's another whole deal in the demographic deal.
We're right on 5 o'clock Eastern. So first of all, thank you to all our clients for dialing in today. A huge thank you to you, Tom, for joining us and sharing your thoughts about, as I said, we're probably going to stumble on a lot of topics, and we did. So thank you very much. Jeanette, thank you as always. I think maybe Anderson Cooper needs to, you could give him a run for his money. And again, for all of our clients, if you have any further questions that were not answered, please contact your wealth manager. And thank you, everyone, on behalf of Robertson Stephens.
Well, thank you very much for a great opportunity for me to quietly get back in the battle for a little while. But I'll be here, and I'll be in this quite regularly. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. And please call whenever I can help.
Thank you.
Thank you.